Efteling is one of the world's top theme park destinations, and outside of Disney and Universal, it's arguably the dark ride capital of the world. But just how good is Efteling really? Let's find out in today's video. Hey everyone, welcome to Looporama. In today's video, I'm sharing my unfiltered thoughts on Efteling, the good, the bad, and the future of the park. Efteling opened in 1952 in Kaatsheuvel in the south of the Netherlands, and it nowadays receives close to 6 million visitors a year. Efteling is beloved and is an iconic part of Dutch culture. A lot of Dutch people grow up visiting the park from a young age. While I did not visit as a young kid myself, and I am not nostalgic for the park in that sense, I still think Efteling is one of the most pleasant and beautiful theme parks I have ever visited. And over the years, I've visited the park numerous times. The atmosphere is honestly almost unmatched. There is so much greenery throughout the park with forested areas, open fields, ponds, flowers, bridges, and quiet pathways. In many places, if it wasn't for a roller coaster and talking trees, I almost felt like I was walking through a really beautiful public park rather than a theme park. Even when you're not standing in front of an attraction, Efteling is simply a really nice place to walk around. It feels like a real landscape and ride collection that has grown organically over almost 75 years, rather than a collection of rides with some trees planted around them afterwards. The layout is not always the most logical, but that also gives Efteling a sense of discovery and authenticity that is difficult to recreate. The fairy tale forest especially almost feels centuries old. It has this feeling of being a strange, historic forest filled with old stories and characters that existed long before you arrived. It has its own identity, its own history, and a slightly darker, older European interpretation of fairy tales, although it blends influences from different cultures and stories from across the globe. Things can be whimsical and colorful, but also strange, creepy, or even slightly unsettling. Efteling is often compared to Disneyland, and while I do see that as a compliment, the park is so much more than just a Dutch Disneyland. The atmosphere begins before you even properly enter the park, with the House of the Five Senses. I generally think this might be the most iconic theme park entrance in the world. Disneyland obviously has a train station, the flower bed, and the entrance tunnels underneath, but when we're talking about just the entrance building, I honestly do not know what could compete with Efteling's entrance. Somehow, it manages to feel grand, magical, and slightly mysterious, while also being incredibly inviting. It does not feel like a castle gate or a massive security checkpoint, it feels like the entrance into another world. Once you enter, you are immediately presented with some of the park's visual landmarks. You have the Efteling Theater, the large Aquanura Lake, and Fata Morgana sitting beautifully across the water. And then, of course, you have the Sprookjesbos or Fairy Tale Forest, the style of which is based on beautiful drawings by Anton Pieck, who set the tone for the style that is now typically known as Efteling. It is a wonderful area and probably the most important part of the entire park. Without the Fairy Tale Forest, there would be no Efteling as we know it today. It is magical for children, but there's also so much craftsmanship and history for adults to appreciate that it almost feels like Dutch cultural heritage. I know some fans feel that some additions have moved away from the original Efteling style, and to a certain degree I understand that criticism. This started all the way back with Carnaval Festival, which has a completely different visual style, while Max and Moritz and the Nest playground area are much more colorful and cartoony in a different way. Even park mascot Pardoes, who is now one of the park's icons of course, does not fit within that narrow original style. Personally though, I'm not particularly worried that Efteling is losing its identity. Baron 1898 or Baron 1898 does not feel or look like Symbolica, and Danse Macabre does not look like Carnaval Festival, but most of them still feel like they belong at the park. The park's identity is truly about the general attention to atmosphere, music, storytelling, landscaping, and detail. That being said, not every newer development blends into the landscape perfectly. The Efteling Grand Hotel is a good example. Overall, it's fine. The front looks impressive and works surprisingly well when seen from the parking lot and park entrance, but it still is really big. From certain parts of the fairy tale forest, you suddenly look directly at the widest side of the enormous hotel, breaking the feeling of being hidden within a forest. The back is also very visible from the park and steam drained, with surface areas that feel too exposed for a luxury hotel in a park known for immersion. But those moments are still the exception. Overall, Efteling looks absolutely spectacular. It is beautiful during the day and stunning at night. Areas like Danse Macabre are especially atmospheric once it gets dark. Now, when talking about dark rides, I kind of want to get a slightly controversial one out of the way first. Carnaval Festival is quite clearly the weakest dark ride in the park, and look, I understand why it's there. It fills an important role. It is clearly aimed mainly at young kids, and it definitely has its own quirky charm. But personally, I do not think it's aging particularly well. The basic idea of traveling around the world, a la It's a Small World, and seeing all of these colorful little characters could still work, but parts of the ride now feel quite dated, both visually and in how some cultures are represented. Efteling has already made changes to certain scenes, but I still think the ride in the entrance area could benefit from a much larger renovation. So I'm not saying that they should get rid of the ride. I know it means a lot to a lot of people, but I do think it could use some fresh energy. And honestly, I feel slightly similarly about Fata Morgana, although Fata Morgana is obviously a far stronger ride. Fata Morgana is still one of the most impressive traditional dark rides outside of a Disney or Universal park. The building looks spectacular across the water, the music is fantastic, and the ride has a good length to it. The gin scene is iconic, many of the sets are incredibly rich and detailed, and a lot of the animatronics still look and move very well considering the age of the ride. But some scenes feel timeless, while others, to me, are noticeably more dated. And I would not want Efteling to strip away everything that makes Fata Morgana what it is, but a careful, substantial refurbishment could make a major difference. Modernizing some animatronics, restoring weakened effects, and perhaps reworking one or two scenes. It is a strange ride for me personally because I can recognize that it is one of the better dark rides in the world, while also admitting that it's not necessarily one I immediately run towards on every visit. Droomvlucht, on the other hand, is another older ride that I think has held up a lot better. From the facade and the queue itself, it feels like a complete fantasy experience. The music is wonderful, many of the scenes still look genuinely magical, and the suspended ride system gives it a movement that feels very different from most traditional dark rides. The spiral ending especially is still such a fun and memorable way to finish the attraction. Then you have Symbolica, which I think is a generally world-class modern dark ride. Pardoes finally gets his own attraction. The building looks beautiful, and the staircase opening with lighting and mist pouring out underneath is such a simple but effective reveal. The 3 tours are a clever idea, although I wish they differed more. And truth be told, their individual scenes are probably some of the weakest moments on the ride, but the main shared scenes are very strong. The planetarium, miniature city, and greenhouse aquarium room are all beautiful. While to me, Villa Volta is a flat ride, a madhouse to be exact, to many it's another important dark ride. It's the first of its kind and still the best version of any madhouse I've done. The music is just wonderful as well. And then you of course have Danse Macabre, which I think is one of the best additions Efteling has made in years. I love the little square in front, and the entrance with the black cat sets the tone perfectly for this wonderfully spooky but not too scary experience. The queue eventually leads into the forest besides the building, which feels genuinely eerie at night in the fog. Inside, the corridors are perhaps slightly too dark, I will say, but the ride is spectacular. The music is iconic, the conductor's appearance is incredibly effective, and the ride system feels completely different from a normal flat ride. Moving on to the roller coasters, Efteling has a solid lineup, even if this has never been the park's main strength. Baron 1898 is probably the best complete coaster experience in the park. And while I love Baron, let's not beat around the bush, the ride is very short. The theming and presentation do a lot of the heavy lifting here, and they do it extremely well. The on-ride pre-show with the music, lighting, and voices builds the tension really well, and the first drop is genuinely fun. The tunnel gives it enough additional depth for it to feel like a proper dive coaster drop, but after that there is simply not much ride left. There are a few inversions and turns, and then you are back at the station. It is a strong experience rather than a particularly strong coaster layout. For thrill seekers, there's also Python, and Python is basically just Python. It is an old school Vekoma looping coaster that now runs extremely smoothly after being retracked from the first drop all the way to the brake run. It fills an important role in the lineup, was unique not just in the country but in Europe when it opened, but it is not heavily themed and does not feel particularly unique compared to the rest of Efteling. Joris and the Draak, on the other hand, is a nice family thrill attraction that works for the entire family while still being fun for coaster enthusiasts. The racing is great, it still has a nice wooden coaster feel to it while not being rough. So, of course, it's not the most intense wooden coaster in the world, and it doesn't need to be, but it still feels fast, a little out of control, and just like pure fun. Then you have Vogelrok, which is a ride I still enjoy, but I also think it could benefit quite a lot from an upgrade. The giant bird outside is obviously iconic, and the actual coaster is still fun. While I will say that the ride used to feel mysterious and impressive to me, nowadays though I do feel like the queue and station are noticeably weaker than the ride itself. Once you walk past the bird, it almost feels like you are entering through a small backstage corridor. The queue doesn't have a lot of theming, the station feels dated, and effects like the bird flying above do not seem as strong as they used to anymore. The coaster itself is still perfectly enjoyable and fills an important role as an indoor family thrill coaster. But compared to Baron, the Vliegende Hollander, or Danse Macabre, it feels quite basic. An improved station, upgraded lighting, and a few additional effects would go a long way. Max and Moritz is a decent dueling power coaster aimed at a younger audience and a useful step in the park's coaster lineup. It sits on the side of the former bobsled style coaster and makes use of that ride station building. It is nicely dressed up and fun without being anything mind-blowing. Then you have the Vliegende Hollander, which has one of the most beautiful ride buildings in the world in my opinion. From the facade and waterfront setting to the queue and station, the entire attraction looks spectacular. The station is easily one of the best looking coaster stations in Europe. The dark ride section is sometimes criticized for being too dark, and I understand why, but personally, I think it works better than some people make it out to be. The darkness creates this creepy feeling of being lost at sea. The ride does a surprisingly good job of creating this illusion that you are out on a vast open ocean. The coaster section itself is fairly simple. The first drop is fun and faster than you might expect, but the rest of the layout does not really do much. It feels a little bit janky, almost as if the boat is rolling around like a shopping cart, though it is neither rough nor uncomfortable. It just kind of feels sluggish. I don't know how to describe it. The splashdown is also appropriate for the Dutch climate without leaving you completely drenched. Overall, I think the Vliegende Hollander is a phenomenal attraction, perhaps even an underrated ride nowadays. Gondoletta is easy to overlook when discussing the major rides, but it is a perfect relaxing attraction. It is a long, peaceful boat journey where you can sit down, take in the surroundings, drink a coffee, have a snack, or just take a break from walking and thrill rides. It is no secret that the thrill lineup could be stronger. There's no big destination coaster, and anyone visiting purely for intense roller coasters might leave wanting more. However, with the recent announcement of Missie Luminar, a seemingly third installation of Vekoma's Thrill Glider model, opening in 2029 with a price tag of 50 million euros, I think the park will soon finally be home to that bucket list roller coaster it had been missing. I would personally love to see Efteling also add a themed drop tower of some sort, something along the lines of a Tower of Terror style attraction, but of course designed completely in Efteling's own style. Beyond the rides themselves, Efteling is also just a very complete theme park experience. The food is usually solid and fairly priced. It obviously is not cheap per se, but by major theme park standards, the prices feel relatively reasonable. When it comes to shows and entertainment, there's usually quite a lot going on throughout the year. I was personally never the biggest fan of the old Ravelijn show, although that entire experience is currently being reworked. Beyond the larger shows, you also have characters, musical performances, and smaller interactive moments that make the pathways feel alive. And then, of course, you have Aquanura, the fountain show on the lake next to the entrance. And honestly, every version of Aquanura has been good. The music is beautiful, the fountains look spectacular, and it is a nice way to finish a day at Efteling. One area where Efteling is consistently excellent is operations. Ride crews work quickly, trains are dispatched efficiently, and the employees are generally very nice. On a busy day, you might not complete every major attraction and all of the smaller details as well, but the high capacity rides and spread out layout distribute people reasonably well. Despite the huge amount of greenery, water, old buildings, and detailed scenery, the park is usually extremely clean and well maintained. You will do a lot of walking, but there are plenty of trees, shaded pathways, benches, and quieter areas for a break. Now, all of this has also brought me to the overall value of Efteling. And while tickets and annual passes are not cheap by any means, compared to major European parks or even international parks of a similar scale, Efteling feels relatively reasonably priced. Even after completing the major attractions, there are still fairy tales, restaurants, shows, gardens, and details to explore. Of course, the park is not perfect like the things that I've mentioned before. There are a few places where its standards are not quite as high as in its best areas, such as the Fabula building, which is prominently located at the front of the park and is sometimes jokingly called the hamburger box by fans. But these weaknesses partly stand out because the overall standard is so high. Looking towards the future, I am genuinely very excited about where Efteling is going. Danse Macabre has shown that the park is capable of creating a major original attraction with a new ride system, detailed storytelling, and an amazing ride experience. Even smaller additions, such as the Hoogmoed drop towers near Baron, show that the park can fill gaps without everything needing to become an enormous project. Above everything else though, the fairy tale forest needs to remain at the heart of the experience. It represents the park's history, its identity, and it's probably its greatest cultural contribution. Efteling can build modern roller coasters, new hotels, and technologically advanced dark rides, but it should never become embarrassed by the slower, stranger, and more traditional parts of itself. So who is Efteling actually best for? It is obviously an incredible family destination, but I think no matter who you are, I think it's just genuinely one of the world's greatest theme parks. Its main strengths are its atmosphere, storytelling, dark rides, family attractions, and unmistakable identity. For roller coaster enthusiasts, I still think Efteling is absolutely a must-visit park, but I will say that when your only priority is experiencing the most intense or best coasters possible, it will probably not be your number one destination. It is beautiful, strange, charming, occasionally creepy, and almost impossible to compare directly with anywhere else. And honestly, I hope it stays that way. Now, that was it for today's video. I would love to know your thoughts on Efteling in Kaatsheuvel, the Netherlands. Thank you for watching. That's all folks. I'll see you on the next one on Looporama.